Suppose the gravitational constant was just a teeny bit weaker than it is. Well, amazingly, if it were just 1 part in 10 to the 14th weaker than its actual value, then after the Big Bang, there would not have been enough gravitational force to result in coalescence of stars, galaxies, planets, and us. It would have been this infinitely diffused, sterile universe without the possibility of anything like life. If the gravitational constant was a tiny bit stronger, then everything would come back together a little too soon, and the Big Bang would be followed by a big crunch. Not a pretty picture, because we needed the time, of course, for life to appear, and that time would not have been offered. So here you have a really interesting circumstance where this constant, which could have had almost any value you could imagine, happens to have exactly the precise value, and a very fine tolerance indeed, that makes life possible. And that's just one of about 15 such constants, all of which, if you tinker with them, result in a universe not capable of sustaining any kind of form of life. I'm not just talking about life like we recognize it, but anything that involves complexity. And that seems to be a profound challenge to the strict atheist, although there's a way out of it. So let me tell you what the way out is. I mean, basically, you've got 2 options here. First of all, you cannot say this is just a coincidence. It is too unimaginably unlikely to be just a coincidence. So either there is an infinite series of parallel universes out there that we cannot measure that have different values of these constants. And of course, we have to live in the one where life is possible, or we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Or you have to say that they were actually set on purpose. Now, which of those conclusions requires more faith? This is this universal human behavior characteristic property, the knowledge that there is such a thing as right and there is such a thing as wrong, and that we are called to do the right thing. And if you look down through history, across cultures, across times, you will not find a human population or a human culture that did not have that moral law. They interpreted it often very differently in terms of deciding what was in the right column and what is in the wrong column, but they didn't disagree that there were such columns and that we were supposed to try to do the things that were in the column called right. Where does that come from? Well, various arguments have been brought to bear on this that relate to evolutionary pressures. Because after all, you can imagine that if you do nice things to other people, maybe they'll do nice things to you, and you will be reproductively more successful. That's what evolution cares about. That would be called reciprocal altruism. A lot of this is about altruism. And of course, if you're nice to your relatives, they share your DNA, so their reproductive fitness is also a good thing for the DNA that you're carrying. So you can kind of see why being nice to your relatives would also be something evolution would care about. And you can see some manifestations of these things in animals. But what about radical altruism? What about an Oskar Schindler who decides to risk his life to save thousands of Jews from the Holocaust? They're not of his particular tribe, and yet he does this because he feels called to do so. And we, when we hear about it, we don't shake our heads and go, well, that was stupid. No. We admire this. We think of this as the most noble kind of action that a human being can take. We wish that we were more like that. We aspire to that. We often fall short, but there's something calling us to do that. Now, evolution would say that's a scandal. Oskar Schindler is really mixed up here about what his purpose in life is. So is Mother Teresa. So are all these people that have decided to risk their lives in Darfur trying to save people from a terrible disaster at the very risk of losing their own life in the process. And yet, when we look at that, we think that's what we should be doing. Where does that come from? Interesting. Now, I'm not going to say any of these arguments are proofs, and if any of these arguments fell apart, my faith would not be shaken. But I hope you will see that these are the kinds of points that can cause a previous atheist like myself to begin to really wonder, what's going on here?